Hi, I'm Rob Bogue, and welcome to How to Not Get Sucked In. And I start this with a black hole in the center of everything. And black holes are these giant vacuum cleaners of the universe. They suck in everything. And that's stars and planets and everything gets sucked into a black hole and nothing can escape. And I think we've all probably felt that way at one time or another as we're working in volunteer situations when we are working compassionately. So the subtitle for this conversation, the subtitle for this presentation is Compassionate Boundaries. And we're going to talk through how do we be compassionate and yet maintain our boundaries so that we don't end up getting burned out. And I think the starting point whenever I have this talk with folks is really to take a step back and figure out why are we doing this. Whenever we're volunteering, whether it's a ministry or a community thing, it is about compassion. It's about caring for other folks. And when I'm doing that, I tend to ask people, well, what is the definition of compassionate for you? Do you know a person? Is there a kind of person, perhaps a type of person that you feel is compassionate, or do you know specific people? And sometimes I'll get answers like a Buddhist monk, that the Buddhist religion or set of orthodox followings are all about generating compassion and decreasing attachment. And so sometimes I'll get this Buddhist monk answer. But if I press and I say, well, what about a person? What about a real live person, a specific individual? Who do you think of? And I'll get the answer, Mother Teresa, and of course, a saint, literally, and someone who is incredibly compassionate. But Mother Teresa didn't have a tendency to write a whole lot, didn't leave us with tons and tons of writings, and she's also passed. And so if I press and I go, well, what about a living person? What about a person who is alive today who embodies compassion? And sometimes I'll get this answer, the Dalai Lama. And I end here because the Dalai Lama has done a great deal of writing with scientists to try and better understand our human condition. But before I get to some of his writings, let's just get back to definitions. Let's take a look at what is it that compassion means. And so the dictionary definition is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, and it's often accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. This compassion is about a sympathy and a sorrow and a desire to alleviate that suffering. If we were to look at this from a biblical context, you see in Matthew 25:40, it says, "The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" In other words, when you are compassionate, I am happy. This is you doing something for me. And so we have compassion, which is an observation of struggle, a desire to reduce struggle. But then we have to think about this from the point of view of the value of struggle. This is a bird's nest, and there's a baby bird inside this egg trying to break free. Should I help it? Whether it's a baby bird or it's a chick or it's another animal that escapes from an egg, what we have learned is that if you help it by helping it get out of its shell, you actually decrease its lifespan. It is more likely to die because it didn't have the struggle it needed to get out of its shell. So one of the things that's challenging for us as we're trying to figure out compassion is, how do we know when to leave the struggle there, right? So Jesus did not eliminate all of the struggles of the world. He didn't undo sin. He just forgave people for it. So compassion, any compassion, has its limits. Now, we can go beyond compassion to altruism. Altruism goes further. And this quote is from the Dalai Lama and Paul Ekman in the book Emotional Awareness. It says that altruism, it involves some risk to your own welfare when you relieve the suffering of another person. And the thing is that when we're talking about altruism compared to compassion in most settings, in most volunteer settings, well, that's road closed. We don't really want to go there. We don't want the volunteers taking up risks that they don't need to take. That's not the goal of any compassion. Compassion doesn't have that risk, and therefore we can continue in that compassion over the long term. Altruism may be great, but it tends to exhaust people, wear them out, and leaves us with nothing left. So this is a picture of the Hoover Dam. This is a picture of the backside of the dam with all the water. And I show you this because I want to ask you a question. If I were to tell you that the Hoover Dam supplies power to Nevada, Arizona, and California, it is a huge hydroelectric power plant. Why would you think that the dam was built? Do you think the dam was built because it could be a hydroelectric power plant? Well, as it turns out, that's not the truth. The real reason, the primary reason why the dam was built was actually to reduce suffering due to flooding. See, the thing is that sometimes we confuse our idea of compassion, our desire to help others, with attachment, our attachment to the outcome. So if I were to have a son and I wanted him to get into a good school, it would be compassionate for me to be helpful to him to do that. But there's a point at which I become too involved, too attached to his outcome because he is my son and he's got to get into the best college or whatever. And I have moved from compassion. Compassion is the shield, the thing that we are using to hide this attachment where I'm trying to control my son's lives. So sometimes when we say we're being compassionate, we're really overly attached to the end outcome. And we've got to be careful about that because it means we're working on us and not really working in service of others. The thing is, whatever wounds I have in my life, whatever college I didn't get into, whatever job I didn't get, whatever girlfriend I didn't get, whatever it is, I cannot heal that through helping another person. If I didn't get enough food as a child, I cannot feed other people and relieve that hunger that I still remember. I can't do it. Now, you can heal those old wounds. You can go work on them directly and heal them. But by helping others to eat, by servicing others, you're not actually getting rid of that old wound that you have. So you have to be concerned when you start thinking about how this is going to make me feel better about some problem I've had in my life, because at the end, you may end up feeling bitter about the very people that you were helping. And that doesn't really make a ton of sense. Another consideration when we're talking about compassion is that we cannot solve every problem. If we try, we'll end up like this woman on the treadmill. We'll be on the treadmill exhausted. We have to figure out which things we can help with and which things we can't. And that is the heart of discernment. And discernment is really embodied by the Serenity Prayer. And we name it, God grant me the serenity, because of serenity. He says, serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That stuff is not mine to own. The courage to change the things I can. If I'm supposed to step in, I want to do it. And the wisdom to know the difference. And here, the key part, the part that is important, is the wisdom to know the difference. We have to be serene. We have to accept that we cannot solve every problem. We will not personally end all world hunger everywhere. We will not heal every person. We will not prevent every atrocity. We can only do those things which are within our scope and power, the things that we are supposed to do. A lot of times people think that compassion is an emotion, but in the work of the Dalai Lama and the scientists and neuropsychologists and all the people that have worked together, they have come to an opposite conclusion. They've said that compassion is not an emotion. It is not a feeling, right? It is something that is a conscious decision. It's a thing that you cultivate inside of yourself to accomplish a goal. So I will butcher this, and my apologies, but Sagrada Familia, the Sacred Family, is a cathedral in Spain, in Barcelona, Spain, and it was started in 1883. And the latest thing that I've heard is they'll finish work in about 2026. That's a long-term commitment to building that cathedral. And that's the kind of commitment that you have to have towards cultivating compassion, right? So we want to cultivate compassion. It's not something that's going to just magically come upon us. It's an enduring characteristic, right? So we don't think of somebody as feeling something as an enduring characteristic, but we will say that is a compassionate person, right? Emotions distort our perception of reality. Almost uniformly, an emotion will distort the way that we see the outside world, but compassion does not have those characteristics. The other thing is compassion is very limited and restricted. It always occurs when we see other people suffering and we want to relieve it, right? That is compassion. So I don't feel compassion as much as I decide to be compassionate, to make that a characteristic or a value of me. If we look at Brené Brown's work, and particularly quote out of Rising Strong, boundaries are critical. And what she says is, the most compassionate people I have interviewed are also have the most well-defined and well-respected boundaries. So what Brown is saying here is, you have to have boundaries to be compassionate. You want to be at the very most compassionate. You have to have well-respected boundaries, because boundaries don't just keep Mongols out. Boundaries help us know who we are and who we are not. It is a dividing line that helps us understand. It provides us with that clear delineation. It provides us with knowing a way to the harbor that is safe and knowing where the rocks are. It's like this lighthouse. This is in Holland, Michigan. It's called Big Red, and it notifies us this is the channel. This is the way. And if you get off of this, you may run into something wrong. Jack Canfield, who is popular for Chicken Soup for the Soul, in his book The Success Principles says, 99% is a bitch, 100% is a breeze. In other words, those delineations are the things that you need to be able to do what you want to do. It isn't about whether it's nice or not. It's about how do you get to making this easy for you to continue to be compassionate. A lot of times when we start talking about boundaries, people kind of tense up a little bit and they're like, ooh, this is going to be conflict, and I don't like conflict. I'm afraid of conflict. The thing is conflict is natural. It's two opposing forces. It is the natural result of a boundary, and it is not bad. You have to get okay with conflict. These kids are in conflict now in their tug-of-war game, but at the end of this, they'll probably go play on a merry-go-round or something else. Conflict itself is not bad. It's what you do with that conflict that can become problematic. We have to keep things in balance. We can only give what we can give. You cannot give more than what you're able. You have to remember that whatever it is that you're giving is something you're not allowed to reinvest back into yourself. So you have to be able to give only what's acceptable. If you get this particular balance just a little further out, the whole thing's going to come crashing down and everything ends. The compassion, the self-care, it all goes away because we've gotten too far out of balance. There are two kinds of boundaries. There's the temporary protective boundary. I can't do this right now. I don't want to text people right now because I'm not comfortable with that. And the permanent and defining boundary. This boundary is, I will not do this. And because I will not do this, I know this, that I will not do this. It makes the decisions very, very easy. Another common point of confusion is the difference between a boundary and a barrier. A boundary defines what's you and not you. Boundaries are not about defense. If you are arming the barrier, if you're turning it into something with razor wire on top and you've got machine guns and everything, and when somebody gets near it, you tense up, that's no longer a boundary. Because a boundary is just a definition. You don't have to defend it because it simply is. One of the confusion points as we talk about compassion is that self-care isn't as important as caring for others, right? Like, I don't care about me. Well, we are told to preserve the Sabbath, to keep time for ourselves. And so whatever it is that you do, Tai Chi or meditation or whatever else it is, you want to work on your ability to make sure that you're sustaining enough self-care to stay in balance. And when you're really good at balance, it doesn't mean that you're never going to get off balance. It means you're going to discover it sooner and recover quicker. That's what Richard Moon, who's an Aikido master, says about the great masters. He said they just discover they're out of balance sooner, recover faster. That's all you get. You don't get perfection. If you don't think still that self-care is good care, think about what happens when you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks dip from the sky, and what do you do now? Well, they tell you very explicitly, and every time you're on an aircraft, that you should put your own mask on first. Well, now, why would you do that? Right? Like, you care about your kids, you want them to survive. The thing is, you can survive for a long time on reduced oxygen, but you won't necessarily stay conscious. What you want to do is make sure that you have oxygen so that you can remain conscious, so that you can help others when they need it. And so self-care is this. It is putting your own mask on first, knowing that your self-care has to be a priority. And you can only be compassionate when you're meeting your own needs and you're staying in balance. So in summary, we want to make sure that we're siding on the side of compassion and not altruism. We shouldn't be taking risks when we're working with others. Second, we can't heal ourselves through others. We have to focus on the fact that whatever we're doing for others is for them. If we've got hurts and places inside of us that are still wounded from our childhood, and we all do, those will have to figure out a healing path another way. Boundaries are going to protect us and others so we know who we are, what we will do, and what we won't. And finally, boundaries come with conflict. But conflict isn't bad. Conflict allows us to test and see each other, and it allows us to choose behaviors which bring things together. Thank you.